Congratulations, you've just found the number one over 50 health and wellness podcast on the planet. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert and founder of the Silver Edge, and I am on a mission to help men and women just like you build lean, strong, healthy, capable bodies they love for the rest of their lives. My guest today is Dr. James Polakof. Dr. Jim is a true pioneer in the field of holistic nutrition and healthy aging. At 86 years young, Dr. Jim is living proof that with the right mindset, habits, and choices, it's possible to live a long, vibrant, and fulfilling life. Dr. Jim's incredible journey began in the entertainment industry, but his desire to create meaningful impact led him to pursue a PhD in nutrition. Since then, he's dedicated his life to helping others achieve optimal health and longevity. In today's conversation, Dr. Jim shares his insights on nutrition, exercise, managing stress, and cultivating intimacy, all through the lens of healthy aging. We'll talk about why so many of us miss the mark nutritionally, the impact of ultra-processed foods, and how small sustainable changes can set you up for a healthier future. Dr. Jim also dives into the role of movement, the dangers of social isolation, and how developing intimacy and connection can enhance not just your relationships, but your overall well-being. And make sure you stick around because we'll also touch on Dr. Jim's new book, Living Healthy Longer with Dr. Jim, How to Live a Long Life Filled with Intimacy and Good Health, where he unpacks practical strategies for living a long, vibrant life. So if you're ready to take actionable steps towards a healthy, more fulfilling future, this episode is for you. Are you over 50 and feeling like your best days are behind you? If that's you, it's time to reclaim your mojo with the Over 50 Fit Foundations program. This 10-week beginner-friendly workout plan is crafted specifically for men and women in their 50s and 60s who are ready to look and feel their best. Imagine building strength, burning fat, and boosting your confidence, all while enjoying workouts designed with your unique needs in mind. This program addresses the hormonal changes and slowing metabolism that come with age, offering safe and effective exercises to help you move with ease and vitality, and can easily be done in your home with limited equipment. With lifetime access to professionally designed workouts, video demonstrations for every exercise, you'll have all the tools you need to succeed. Plus, you'll join a community of like-minded individuals committed to transforming their health and fitness. Don't settle for feeling old before your time. Take this first step towards a stronger, healthier, more confident you. Sign up for the Over 50 Fit Foundations program today and start your journey to lasting fitness. You can learn more by checking out the show notes for this episode over at silveredgefitness.com/309. That's silveredgefitness.com/309. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Dr. Jim Polakof. Dr. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really excited to jump into today's conversation, but I want to start by just kind of backing up and learn a little bit about you. It seems to me that most people who end up in either nutrition, personal trainer, health-related kind of jobs, they have a story, how they got here. What's your story? How'd you get here?
Well, it's an interesting story. There was a period of time that back way when I was making movies, and I finally decided it was a feast or famine industry. But one of the things that while I was making movies, and I made 10 of them actually, I directed and produced, I wrote, but in any case, I realized that I wanted to get into something more meaningful. And what I really saw in the entertainment business is how people were so short-lived, oftentimes because of their health. And I decided I want to do something that's going to carry me forward in health and help others. So that's what motivated me. And I decided to study nutrition. I leaned towards the holistic aspect of nutrition as opposed to the dietitian, shall we say, approach.
Yeah.
And that's how I got involved.
Well, now you mentioned, hey, making movies to studying nutrition and becoming a holistic nutrition coach here. That's quite a leap. But
It is a
what
leap.
age were you when you took this on?
Oh, it was in early 30s, right around that line that I actually jumped into it. And then, of course, a couple of years of very intensive study, and we went from there. But no, it's been enjoyable. I don't really practice it as much anymore. My main goal was to set up wellness practices, wellness for medical practices, because the problem is most doctors, whether we like it or not, don't understand nutrition.
Mm.
So they give their patients minimal advice. Oftentimes they tell you to go and read about it. And as you probably know, the average time that a primary care doctor spends with their patients during consultations is about 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So 7 minutes evaluating your patient, how are you going to get a nutritional advice? So I jumped into the field of trying to set up wellness programs for practices. And the practices that wanted the services most, believe it or not, were plastic surgeons. So I had about 740 plastic surgery practices that I worked with in one form or the other. But that was my mainstay because actually nutritional counseling was a bit frustrating for me.
Now, I find that fascinating, though, that you mentioned that the sector that you were going after had the most success with were these plastic surgeons. So, were helping them set up nutrition practice? Was nutrition fundamental for their patients in recovery, or overall? Were these people also interested in holistic health? Why nutrition for that particular subset of doctors?
Well, I can either make something up or I can tell you the truth. And I suppose I,
Right. And
I
look, at this
suppose
show, either is welcome. Yeah, let's have
I,
it.
oh yes, because they really care about their patients. No, I have to say that, and I don't want to make plastic surgeons seem as mercenaries because they do have good intentions. But in any case, their goal is to do their procedures. And obviously from those procedures, hopefully they get referrals. One of the things that many plastic surgeons found that was missing from their practice is the ability to maintain a patient because once the procedure is done, we don't need you anymore. And when you don't need them anymore, you're not referring patients to the plastic surgeon. So they wanted something that would help retain their patients.
Uh,
And that's why they bought into, well, what if we offered a wellness program, something that patients will continue to stay with us for after their procedure? Make
okay, that
sense?
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, if I'm going to a plastic surgeon, I probably have an aesthetic goal in mind. And clearly, if I'm a practitioner, a doctor in that kind of a practice, and somebody's coming in, hey, I want you to improve my looks, for example. Well, I could offer this surgery offering, and then I could have a holistic nutrition kind of a practice. Okay, yeah, that certainly makes sense. Now, you are Dr. Jim. What is your PhD in?
Nutrition.
So that's what I thought. Okay, so nutrition. And then I meant to ask you this at the very beginning, but I'll ask it now just so our listeners know. How old are you?
Right now, I'm 86 years old.
All right. So I just wanted to get that out there because as we
Yeah.
go on, I want you guys to keep that in mind here. 86 years old,
I'm
still
very
kicking ass.
proud of
Yeah, we're going to talk about what you're doing today, but yeah, let's continue on. So you've written a number of books here, some specifically on healthy aging. Your most recent is Live Healthy Longer with Dr. Jim, How to Live a Long Life Filled with Intimacy and Good Health. I want to
it.
pull some of this apart. Let's start with how nutrition affects specifically healthy aging. You want to kind of set the story there. Why is nutrition so important and why are so many of us missing the mark when it comes to nutrition right now?
Well, obviously, much of it has to do with healthy eating. The problem is, as we age, as you well know, as a fitness expert, as we age, our metabolism slows down. We really can't keep pace. Even if we eat a normal diet, we're putting weight on. The older we get, the more weight we put on, the less healthy we become, leading to medications to help stay alive, and the quality of life dissipates. So the idea is, from a nutritional standpoint, if you really get onto the right diet, and I'll start with diet to begin with, obviously exercise, stress management, all these things come into play. But if you have that healthy diet that you're able to adhere to, chances are you're going to age in a healthy fashion. Perhaps you'll be less dependent upon medications as you grow older. And ultimately, you can live a happy life. So I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that is the bottom line. Now, in your estimation, why are so many of us missing the mark? Look, we know that CDC says that 74% of Americans are now overweight or obese. Half of US adults are now pre-diabetic or full-blown type 2 diabetes. Where are we missing the mark nutritionally? Look, we're going to get to the exercise and the stress and the
Sure.
sleep, all that fun stuff, but staying on the nutrition, where are we missing the mark so dramatically here?
Well, I think from a nutritional standpoint, and you mentioned that the obesity. Now, the obesity and most of the statistics are looking at the US, Americans as a whole. I'm focusing right now on, let's say, 65 and older, because there's where the problems really come in. To stick to a diet is the most difficult thing. And I mentioned to you that things, one of the most frustrating things as a nutritional counselor, and I did, hundreds of consultations, but getting people to adhere to whatever they committed to. Very, very difficult. So as a result, we tend to push things off. We tend to eat what we want to eat because, I mean, as we age, we also have more of a compulsion to enjoy life because we don't know how many years we have left. So now we're trying to enjoy life and enjoying life. Part of that is eating and really eating and enjoying what you eat, not necessarily adhering to a diet that's going to keep you healthy. So I think that's the biggest challenge that particularly seniors face from the age of, well, really from the age of the mid 50s on, but certainly once 65 kicks in, you find it more and more difficult to stick to a healthy diet.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. I'm 60, and there's a part of me that says, "Hey, I've come this far. I've accomplished so much, and don't I deserve to enjoy this act of my life?" So I can see how that certainly plays. Now, what do you feel the role of processed and ultra processed foods play in all of this for healthy aging and body composition, given that there's the stark statistic that it's almost 75% of our diets as Americans is made up of processed and ultra processed foods as opposed to real whole nourishing foods.
Right. Well, you just said it. Real, whole, nourishing foods. The word is whole. And we avoid that because sometimes they're hard to find. See your typical supermarket. You walk down the aisle and the supermarket puts in front of you what is going to appeal to
Profitable.
you.
Yeah.
In fact,
Yes.
not only profitable, but what's going to
Yeah.
appeal to you, which is
Yep.
often more profitable.
Yes.
So, there's not a real focus on whole foods that there should be. So number one, with your shopping habits, that discourages you a bit. But I'm one who believes, and of course, the Mediterranean diet I've always favored, but I happen to be myself personally a pescatarian Mediterranean diet person. It's red meat that I think is probably the biggest culprit. And some people disagree. They say, well, I'm going to eat my meat. I'm just going to choose lean portions of meat. But I happen to be one that believes that that red meat is really unhealthy. And so I really stick, as far as diets are concerned, I stick to fish, at least fish twice a week, and the rest whole foods, certainly the veggies, the fruits, all of those things that we're told are good and healthy for us, they're good and healthy for us.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's pull apart the red meat because I mean, let's face it, red meat's got a bad rap. But do you distinguish between, say, bacon and hot dogs and grass-fed, grass-finished beef, or are we lumping just, hey, all red meat, high in cholesterol, whether it's lean or not? Are we lumping all those things together, or is there kind of a continuum of healthy to downright unhealthy when it comes to red meat?
Well, obviously, if you can't get away from the red meat and that's going to be your lifestyle, the leaner the better. The way grass fed is obviously better than than shall we say the typical way of feeding our
Conventional,
cattle,
yeah.
for example.
Yes. Yeah.
Pork, I mean, to me, pork is one of the probably because I was raised as a kid on a farm on bacon and eggs and sausage and eggs, and then hamburgers for lunch, and then a steak or pork chops or lamb chops for dinner. I mean, that was our typical diet. Every meal was something with meat. That contributed to what I ultimately had to have a bypass. And it wasn't because of the way I was eating at the time. It was what I inherited from my youth. And so I say is, if you're in the 60s and you're a grandparent, the greatest gift you can give to your grandson or granddaughter is getting them to eat healthy, get their habits forming young. But in any case, I'm preaching that. That's neither here nor there. So if you have to, obviously, what you've suggested are better alternatives. But as a nutritionist, I mean, when I studied, I looked at what meat did to the arteries. I saw cases, actual cases. And fortunately, I had access to surgeons. So
Mhm.
because I was working with surgeons long before I became a nutritionist, and I was able to go into operating rooms and I was able to take a look at cadavers afterwards to see what a heavy eating meat diet did to your arteries. So I have to say, I'm very prejudiced in that aspect. To me, I just stay away from meat, period, because I don't want to be tempted. I don't want to eat the wrong things. And I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to live healthy at my age. But if you're going to, and you're a fan, and so many people are of red meat, then make it lean, make it healthy, turn to chicken. Once in a while, I'll eat chicken. Again, turkey, that sort of thing. I think that in your diet isn't harmful. And if you're going to eat red meat, make sure it's lean and
Yeah.
healthy,
Yeah.
healthy raised.
Yeah, I'd be hard pressed to argue with you there. I'm an advocate of red meat, but I'm a advocate of this more sustainable, biodynamically farmed meats that are pasture raised, grass fed, grass finished. That's very important. Almost all
Right,
commercial beef is sent to a feedlot where it's grass finished in order to increase the weight and et
right.
cetera, which means more fat in your meat.
And
Now,
look how healthy you are. I mean, you're a,
yeah,
you're a
well,
specimen
it's
of great health, but
yeah, that's right.
which is
Now,
partly
so
due to your fitness.
there's some now that's an N of one study to be clear, right? I am just a person, and in my experience, I am very fit, very healthy. I eat a very meat protein heavy diet. I'm getting approximately 200 grams of protein a day. Now, for just put that in context, I'm 6'2", about 195 right now, which is a little on the lean side for me. But when I look at a lot of these studies on red meat and the negative effects of red meat, a lot of them really aren't pulling apart people like me who eat primarily, almost exclusively grass-fed, grass-finished. I have my own chickens. I have my own, therefore my own eggs. So I am not your typical meat eater. When I look at these studies where we see that meat is bad, especially for heart health and clogging arteries, et cetera, what's included in that are people who are eating horrific. They're eating the standard American diet. They're eating all of these other processed foods. And when I see the quote unquote meat that they're eating, that includes things like bologna and sandwiches and
Oh, right.
spaghetti and lasagna, and it's not discerning between high quality, the way maybe ancestrally we would have eaten meat. Because let's face it, we've eaten meat as long as we've been people, right? All the meats. Just it was important for us to have that nutrient density. We now live in a time where we can be a little more selective about what we eat out of convenience and availability. But it seems like some of those studies don't pull that apart. It's kind of same thing when you look at like the high blood pressure and the we start demonizing sodium. Well, when you look at the high sodium people, they're not getting it because they're grinding too much sea salt on their food. They're because they're eating all these packaged foods. They're eating all those restaurant foods where they're
Exactly.
so
And
there's
by the
a
way,
big, big
you eat out more frequently. So
that's
people,
okay.
people are
Yeah,
getting their
some of us
steak,
certainly do. That's true.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
again, you can't control what the restaurant does. And
right.
in the South
100%.
in particular, they add a lot of
Mhm.
salt to what they,
Yep.
because why? Because it's been a smoking area and salt, people couldn't taste their food. So in the South, they started adding
Yeah,
more and more salt to it, which is unhealthy. To add that much salt. And that's what you get at the restaurant,
yeah.
particularly if you're in the South.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. My wife and I just, we go out for date nights basically. So we don't eat out that often. And when we do, the far and away the biggest flavor I taste in my food, and we go to pretty high end places for the most part, of the date night, right? Is salty. I mean,
But
everything is saltier than I'm used to. So yeah, that's
right.
fair. Yeah, yeah. Alrighty. So we've got this kind of idea that, hey, look, you can't go wrong with a Mediterranean type diet. I think that's just been shown over and over and over again. Certainly, I think we can make, if you're going to eat red meat, we can make a case where there's a scale between Oscar Mayer bologna, not to pick on them, but just that
Right.
quality of meat. And, maybe you're a farmer and you grass raise, grass finish your own beef, etc. So there's a big difference there. But I think that just we can both agree solidly that swapping out as much as possible these processed and especially ultra processed foods for real whole nourishing foods, plants, animals, raw dairy, if that's safely available to you, meat of your choice, certainly seafoods, is the way to go. I think that just the fact that so many of us are eating so much of our diet from processed foods, really, I think that if that's the majority of your diet, 75%, you're going to have a tough time of living the kind of life you're describing here, being healthy,
Uh,
vibrant into your 80s, 90s. I believe I read that you have a goal to be healthy to 100. Is that right?
my personal goal, I have 14 years to go, but barring any unforeseen circumstances, so far so good. I do want to point one other thing out, and that is that many people, and I agree with you. I mean, I think what you're stating about processed, unprocessed foods, et cetera, very important, and obviously a huge secret to living healthy longer. But I do want to point out that many people eat more and more meat because they really feel that's where they get their protein from. And I would point out two of your strongest animals, and I'm sure you've heard the story, is your silverback gorilla and your elephant. And both of them are vegetarians. So I just want to point out that you can get your protein from other sources if that's something that concerns you and why you rely heavily upon meat in your diet.
Yeah, and I've heard that discussion. And for all fairness, just so folks know, I actually at one point in my life went 100% plant based. I was a vegan for a little over a year, so it was a pretty long
Uh-huh.
experiment. And so, yeah, I often would say, well, where do you get your protein? Well, where do you think the gorilla gets his protein? But as it turns out, when you study the physiology and the biology of something like a gorilla, they have a digestive system that has evolved to leach every little bit of amino acid out of all of these plants, which we don't really have, right? And when we talk about plant, because a lot of times we think, and I know you know this as a PhD in nutrition, so I've got to tread carefully how I say this, but we think of protein as one thing, and it's not. It's a collection of amino acids, each with their own specific properties and benefits, right? And specifically when we think about things like
Right.
lysine and leucine and these things that are really important for, I'm all about the muscle protein synthesis and the protein profile, the amino acid profile you're going to get from plants is not I, as ideal, I should say, as you're going to get, say, from a lean grass-fed steak. Is that fair, or am I
Well, no,
maybe overselling that?
I think we can agree to disagree to a bit, but I do want to point out that your lifestyle, as you've described it, is certainly a healthy one. And it's much, much better than, and we're talking generally about seniors. And I sometimes refer to them as mature adults. I like the
There you
mature
go.
part
Yeah,
of it.
right on.
But
Yeah,
but in any case, if you're 65 or older, if you can stick to the way that you're living personally, I think that's great. But the problem is so many seniors get off into a different area. As we
yeah,
mentioned, they
that's
dine
right.
out more often.
Yeah.
They're eating restaurant type food. They're not able to choose the whole foods and the unprocessed foods as they should. So I think we're both on the same track, and I think in the right
Okay.
direction.
No, no. I thank you for saying that. You're right. So when I look, look, there's examples of carnivores out there that only eat
Right.
steaks, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they look fabulous, right? And they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're stronger than they've ever been in their life. But again, that's an N of one study, and they're living a life that's nowhere near what the average American senior citizen is living, right? So most of us are eating crappy food. Most of us are sedentary. Most of us are not dealing with stress. Many of us in this age bracket we're in this loneliness, social isolation epidemic, right? There's
Good
all
point.
of these other factors which is a good springboard for us to kind of move on from nutrition, right? Because
Sure.
I think that you're exactly right. If you just take one thing from this discussion, that is, hey, how can I swap out some of these processed foods and ultra processed foods, real whole foods? You're winning. You're so far ahead of the game there. And let's move on to the next thing I want to talk to you about. What about sedentary? I think that again, it seems like a lot of times as we hit that retirement age, we're empty nesters. We kind of like, "Ah, I did it, and I deserve this rest. I deserve good things." Where most of us have more disposable income. What role does exercise play in us being healthy to 100?
So now we're in your field, which you're,
Yep.
outstanding at. Obviously, I've looked to see what you've done, and we should all have a body like yours. I would love that because sometimes I think I'm overweight, yet it seems to be okay for my health. But you're a perfect specimen of the way health should look. So getting away from that for a moment, as far as exercise is concerned, the problem with becoming senior age, and here again, 65 today is perhaps 55 or 45 yesterday. We're younger at 65 than we were before. We have more vitality.
Yeah.
But then as we begin to creep to 70 and we get to 75 and into our late 70s, and then if we're fortunate enough, we get into our 80s, the maladies of life have carried through. And that is, we're suffering from things like, weak bones, weak backs, arthritis, rheumatism. All of those things begin to set in. And we become a bit lethargic. It's just really the nature. I mean, older people historically basically have been designed to just sit around and watch life go by, which I don't believe in. I believe you want to participate in life vigorously as long as you live. So
Right.
that's my feeling. So, what do I do as a senior? Because frankly, I used to be a championship tennis player. I would play tennis at least 4 to 5 times a week. I won numerous tournaments, both in singles and doubles. But then there came the day that I wasn't able to really play tennis well anymore. And when I can't do it very well, then I tend to say, all right, well, I think I'm just going to kick back and I should be healthy enough. And sure enough, things of old age catch up with you. You start to eat unhealthy, you're laying around, you're sedentary, as you mentioned. That's part of the problem. So, what do I do as a senior who can't get out on that tennis court and really run around like I used to? Obviously, pickleball's an answer if you don't have big problems. I mean, I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
But also the thing that I've found, there are so many other ways that you can exercise to keep healthy. For example, I go to the pool generally 3 to 4 times a week. I don't do laps because I've had a shoulder injury. So I can't do laps. So I aqua jog. So I get into the pool and I basically am moving my legs. I'm moving my arms to a bit of a breaststroke. I'm using a noodle, but I do it 4 or 5 times a week and I do it for about half an hour. The other thing that I found is helpful is a simple little thing like chair yoga. There are so many chair yoga
Yeah.
episodes that you can get
Yeah.
on YouTube. You follow them for maybe 20, 25 minutes, and at least you're not sedentary any longer.
Right.
And of course, you've got the answers to the way that a senior really should exercise. So I'm not going to tread on your in your territory because you know it
Yeah.
better than I. But I'm just letting you know that what I do as a senior to avoid things I can't do, I've got to do something, and those are things that I do.
I love that. Yeah. So our audience here is going to be primarily men and women in their 50s and 60s.
Right.
And the mission here is to set us up in life to change behaviors so that they become habits, so that we are leading this healthy aging lifestyle so that we end up like you. so we're vibrant and healthy, and we're because I'll tell you this, a lot of, and this is kind of sad, but a lot of folks come into our coaching program and their motive for coming in is because they don't want to turn into their parents. They become caregivers for parents, or they're watching their parents' declining health, or unfortunately, maybe they've fallen and broken a hip, and I think we all know kind of how that
Right.
ends. Certainly, I have some personal experience there,
You and
but
me both.
yeah, most people in our age certainly, I'm guessing, do. So, and I've often joked on this show. I said, "Look, I'm going to do this until I'm 70, and I'm going to turn it over to some young person. They can take over the silver edge, and I'm going to start the golden edge, and I'm going to work with people in their 70s and 80s, and then maybe when I get there, I'll see what the next chapter is."
Well,
But
you're
yeah, I
absolutely
think
right. Yeah. You're absolutely correct that starting in your 50s, early 50s, mid 50s, starting to
yes,
get into healthy habits, those are the things that are going to lead you into your 70s and 80s to where you can actually enjoy life rather
right.
than wake up moaning every day that you don't feel great. And that's what a lot of, unfortunately, older people do.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point, right? If we can start now, because a lot of people feel like, in this 50s and 60s, I'm over the hill, it's too late, I'm too old, can't teach an old dog new tricks, all of that garbage. They have this in their head. And certainly, I think you would strongly agree, it's never too late to start. I mean, if you're in your mid 80s, it's not too late to start.
Of course.
But if you get that head start in your 50s and 60s, and you develop strength and coordination and balance and stamina, and you get good heart health, and you carry some lean muscle mass on your body, and we're seeing more and more evidence that that type 2 muscle that comes specifically from a strength training type of a stimulus is muscle is the organ of longevity. It has all of these wonderful health giving properties. Muscle is it's an insulin sink, and absorbs and uses that to help kind of prevent the whole pre-diabetes creep that a lot of us are seeing in this age group. So lots of wonderful things we can do to set ourselves up for our 70s, our 80s, if we're blessed enough, maybe our 90s, to be able to enjoy that part of our life, right? To be able to travel, do
You're
things we love.
absolutely correct. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
absolutely correct. And that's why I'm so anxious for you to be on my podcast because my listeners, who are again generally in their 60s up to their 70s, 80s, and maybe even into their 90s, they need to know these things that you're conveying, and we want to find out exactly fitness, exercise, what role they play, because most of us don't understand that. Most of
Right.
us don't understand the importance of what you just conveyed. And the nice thing about starting in your 50s and in your early 60s is the fact that you get into the habit of doing things you should do.
Yeah.
And once you get into that habit, you're unlikely to get off that habit or out of that habit when you get into your 70s and 80s. So you're exactly on the right track.
Love it. Love it. All right. So, Dr. Jim, let's transition a little bit. So, we've talked about nutrition, we've talked about movement, two of my favorite things. Let's talk about the role of stress. And look, we're recording this, it's November 1st
Well, all
in
right.
2024 in the US. There's plenty of things to be stressed about. We have elections right in front of us. So, of course, here in the US, there's never been a bigger political or cultural divide, I feel like, and that seems to be growing by the day. And there's all this hateful rhetoric, and we're bombarded with stress. We've already briefly mentioned that there is a loneliness epidemic that kind of was not kind of, but was greatly exacerbated by the whole COVID uh, pandemic. People like me, I've been a traveling salesperson. I was out in front of people, and all of a sudden one day I was working from home and on Zoom calls. And of course, now I've transitioned to this full time, but never really got back into the same social practices that I had before. Let's start with stress, and then I want to keep the loneliness and isolation separate. We'll talk about that separate. But what can we do? What's the effect of stress on our health as we age, and what can we do to kind of mitigate some of that?
All right. Well, good question. Excellent question, actually. And you're right about the political divide. The sadness of the whole thing is, regardless of how the outcome of the election, and here we are, as you mentioned, November 1st, recording this interview, I'm sure by the time it airs, we will possibly have one of the other candidates who's
Hopefully,
president of the
yes.
United States. In any case, that stress, that political divide is going to continue. Don't believe for a second that all of a sudden, whoever is elected, that we're all going to change and the political divide is going to go away. It's not. Those who lost are going to be as adamant as ever about how they feel personally. And the people who win are also going to feel strongly about it. So you're still going to have this divide. The only thing is, we're just going to have to learn to how we can live with each other. And I just remember here again, I'm 86 years old, but I can tell you that I remember the day when you politically had very strong disagreements, but you learned how to live together. You could like each other, you could love each other, I should say, and still be able to get along, even though you had different political beliefs. That's changed. Somehow
Yes.
we've got to get back to realizing, regardless of how our neighbor feels, he or she is our neighbor. And, we have to open up and say, listen, we don't agree with each other politically, but that's the beauty of America is we can agree to disagree.
Right.
So somehow we got have to get to that point. But that still belabors the question, what do we do about stress in the meantime? And loneliness, which you're going to talk about in a moment, is a very important subject, particularly for seniors. But I have to say that the problem that I've encountered in terms of clients that I've worked with, particularly as we age, is the fact that we don't want to do yoga anymore. I mean, I'm talking about yoga and meditation where we sit in a lotus position and we meditate. I'm sorry, it just isn't in the books for most people who are getting older as we age. So we have to find, in my opinion, different ways to relieve our stress. And to me, simplicity is always the best answer. When in doubt,
Mm,
find the simplest course of how you can begin to relax. Sometimes it's a very, very simple thing of perhaps in the afternoon, rather than getting in the lotus position, you find 10 or 15 minutes to just find a quiet place where you can begin to think of very pleasant things, get away from your environment, think of things that you really love. To me, one of my great experiences is laying in a hammock on the big island of Hawaii, swaying to the cool breeze and listening to the waves. Now, guided imagery, in a sense, is what takes me there. So, in an afternoon, I might spend 10 or 15 minutes just closing my eyes and remembering and recalling or living actually those like ocean breeze, those waves splashing. Everyone has their place where they would like to be, the
sure.
experience that they have enjoyed most in life. And I suggest getting back to that experience 10 or 15 minutes a day. And maybe you even drift into a little bit of a nap, which is perfectly good and healthy
Yep.
and and energizes you. But to me, we have to find as we age, we have to find simplicity in how we avoid stress, and that means getting into a different place than where we are often.
Okay, yeah, I love all of that, and look, I think for most of us, we're talking about world politics and political climate, those stressors are outside of our control, and so I think that learning to deal with the stress as opposed to the stressor, you're not gonna fix it. I mean, we can be activists and we can move things in our own way, but we're better served individually for our personal health and this healthy aging journey by working on how we react to stress. I love that idea about just taking this little mini break. I'm a big fan of gratitude practices. One of my favorite practices I've ever heard was the if you journal, so you're writing down electronically, or I prefer a good old fashioned piece of paper, but every day you're going to start the day by writing out 5 things you're grateful for. And the first day is really easy. Everybody has 5 things they can be grateful for. Then the next day, you're going to write another 5 things. You're going to start the day by writing what you're grateful for. And they can't be the same things on that were on day one. So day two is pretty easy. I think most people can say that think right off the top of their head,
No,
10 things they're grateful for. But guess what
right.
happens a week in? It gets challenging. And I learned this from a woman named Debbie Wayne. She was on this podcast a while back. She's a gratitude expert. And what happened to me is it's the practices. You're going to do this for 30 days. You're going to start every day with just write 5 things you're grateful for without repeating any. Is my personal experience was I was going through the day actually looking for things to be grateful for because I knew I was going to have to write them down the next day. So I was thinking, oh, there's the sun coming through the trees in such a beautiful way. And I got to remember to write that down tomorrow in my gratitude
Right.
journal. But just having this kind of shifting, like you're saying, I'm going to shift from what might be an ugly reality to this peaceful place, to this, I personally feel that we as a culture have more in common with each other, regardless of what side you happen to be on the political divide, than we do that separates us. I think that separation is manufactured and I think it's fed to us for commercial reasons.
Oh, that's so right. So
And
right.
yeah, I think that if we just back up and look at the big picture, I think we'll find that we have way more in common than we have what separates us
Right.
politically.
And journaling is a good idea. As a matter of fact, at our wellness retreat, one of the retreats, one of the things we teach is journaling. It's
Mm,
so important to write it down if you can. And if you can't have arthritis and you don't write very well, then record it. I mean,
yeah,
there
you
are
can do that
different
now.
ways.
Yeah.
But even though it's John Kabat-Zinn's first book on mindfulness meditation, is still an excellent book to read if you really want to get into that particular area. And then also, I'm not going to get way out there, but some people really are in touch with their spirit guides, and they're able to sometimes leave life as we know it, the reality of life, and get into that aspect of it. So,
Sure.
regardless of whatever motivates you or gets you there, you really need to get away from where you are and be able to, at least for a short period of time, you know, feel and have it penetrate in your soul
Yes.
exactly what pleases
Yeah.
you.
Right, right, 100%. And I think another just a quick tip here is give the news and the social media a break. It's so stressful and we're just getting triggered, especially those of you that are doing, if you're laying in bed at night and you're scrolling your phone through through the
Right.
news, or maybe you're starting the day scrolling the news or in social media where you're just getting triggered. Maybe not the best way to start and finish your days. Bookend your days with happy things and not things that
Absolutely.
are that
I'm
are
a
getting
strong
you all
believer.
worked up.
I'm a
Yeah.
strong believer in music therapy. End your day
Yeah.
by just
Sure.
sitting back and listening to music 10 or 15 minutes before
Love
you're
it.
you're going to turn in and
Love it.
relax. Let it absorb what you really enjoy. You're going to have a better night's sleep.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And we've talked about sleep ad nauseum. I think most of my listeners know how I feel about sleep. It's like the tide in the bay, and it's going to make all of the boats rise when you improve your sleep 100%.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of kind of moving on from just managing stress, dealing with stress, I want to kind of segue now into loneliness because this is something that seems to be, I mean, it doesn't seem to be, it is a growing epidemic, especially in my age group, your age group. So, just that 50, 60 on up age group, we seem to be becoming more and more socially isolated. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the dangers there and then some things we can do to break out of that?
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. In fact, that's one of the chapters in my book that deals with loneliness. And the older you get, as you age, you're going to be more and more a culprit of that loneliness aspect. I mean, you could lose a loved one, obviously, as we age. That happens to so many. But there are other aspects as well. We're living alone. There are seniors today. There are more seniors today living alone percentage wise than ever before.
Mm.
So loneliness, and here again, if you're in your 50s and early 60s, you're probably not experiencing it as much as you're going to when in your 70s and 80s. So if you're living into your 70s and 80s, there is a very good chance you're going to be lonely. There's going to be reasons. So that social interaction that you mentioned is so important. And you need to set the stage early on. You need to have to become that socialized animal, so to speak, in your 50s and 60s. So you can carry forth that in your 70s and 80s, people around you who are going to be your support group because that's obviously an alternative to being lonely. But so many, as we age, so many of us are lonely. I'm happy to say I'm one of the fortunate ones, but others are not so fortunate.
Yeah, yeah, I see it all the time with retirees, especially a lot of us that are career driven, right? But, I spent 22 years with the same company doing this basically the same thing as a sales guy, and that was my social circle. I had some other friends outside of work, but I spent all day, every day on the weekdays with these people. And when I retired, they didn't. When I moved on, they didn't. And now, I've got a small company. I got 3 employees, so we're just a little tiny, and we're remote as well. It's just a different dynamic, and I'm kind of an introvert, not kind of, I'm an introvert as well. So it's difficult, and I had to make a conscious effort to get out, step outside my comfort zone, and find this new community. And we mentioned pickleball earlier. I'm recent into pickleball. I started early this year, but I fell in love with it. And one of the surprising things there is that community. And so you'll enjoy this. I go to a couple of times a day. I play at an beautiful indoor facility here in Leland, North Carolina. Shout out to House of Pickleball. But I play a couple of times. I play on my Tuesdays, I play from 10 to 12, and I play on my Thursdays, I play from 12 to 2. And the people who can, frankly, can go and play pickleball for 2 hours from 10 to 12 on Tuesdays are senior citizens.
That's
So my
right.
new group of friends, I'm the young guy. I roll in there at 60 and they're, "Hey, Gavin, how we got the kid in here. Let's go." And I'm absolutely getting fooled by men and women in their 70s and 80s on the pickleball court. And this is a new tribe for me. So there are ways in finding things that you're passionate about, things that you like, and actually but you have to plug in. You have to, if you're like me and kind of an introvert, you have to be uncomfortable to get started, but the rewards are so great to have just this network of people. And first they're acquaintances, and then they become friends, and then you sort of form this tribe. And I want to ask you this: what is it? There's no replacing face to face community. There just isn't, right? That's family, friends, social circles. What's your feeling about these online communities? Because certainly I'm plugged in and have lots of quote unquote virtual friends as well. Is where does that play in when we talk about combating loneliness and social isolation?
Well, again, certainly better than nothing, so to
Sure.
speak. Online communications, we've been doing that for a long time. And fortunately, seniors, people in their 60s and 70s have taken to Facebook. They can now, interact with their grandchildren, regardless of that's made a huge difference in people's lives. But unfortunately, some of these things are short lived. You gave a perfect example why I'm going to encourage pickleball even more. I have a friend in San Diego who's 65 who shared with me just 2 days ago the fact that, and he was a tennis player and still does play a little bit of tennis, but he took up pickleball. And he said, my God, he said, I'm really good. I'm fast. I'm still adroit. I'm in my mid 60s. But these people who are in their 70s and 80s
Yeah.
are schooling me in this sport.
Yes.
And I mean, my God, I was lucky to win 1 out of 7 games.
Yeah.
And he said,
Yeah.
and they stand in line. What does this tell you about the people in their 70s and 80s? It tells you that obviously not only are they in a good condition, but they're alert and they're socializing. So
Yeah.
yes, I think number one, you've got to get out regardless. Yes, you can use the internet. We can podcast with each other or we can interact with each other via the internet, but getting out and physically being able to socialize, I think is so important. And here again, you've got to get off your butt and get out there and do it.
You do.
Even if it's
Yeah.
a senior center, even if it's playing cards, you've got to have that social interaction. It's so important. And there are so many opportunities to do so. We just have to find them. And then again, just like anything else, get in the habit of doing it.
Yeah. Amen. Well spoken. Absolutely love that. So, yeah, folks out there listening, if you are maybe you're considering retirement coming up, I would suggest starting to pre-plan. What are you going to do? And I don't mean financially. Hopefully, you've got that piece in order, and there's plenty of resources for helping you there. But I think less so just that all of a sudden, now what sort of thing. I know I had a retirement party with my company, and there were some guys older than me, some guys that I've worked with forever, and I was like, "Hey, man, you're next, right? When are you going to retire?" And I heard from more than one person, very similar response. Well, I don't know what I'll do after this. I don't, they were like, "Hey, you're lucky. You're passionate about doing this new thing, this next chapter." I have no idea what I do. What am I going to do? Sit home at home all day, every day? And so, starting to plan that social side of retirement, I think, is a great piece of advice for rolling into your 70s, 80s, 90s as a social animal and not becoming, socially isolated. Yeah.
Well, and I think the big problem is really with the economic disadvantaged seniors. If you're playing golf, for example, and you've got your golf buddies, and after you're retired now, and you go out every day or every other day, and you play golf with your friends, that's wonderful. You're socializing, you're exercising, you're socializing, everything in a one capsule. But the disadvantaged seniors are the ones who can't afford to go out and play golf every day. They can't afford to do different things that some of us are able to do. Those are the people that I'm really concerned about. And these are the people who need to get out and need that
Right.
social interaction. So I say, find a senior center, get involved with their activities. It's free. You don't have to spend any money doing it, but get out and do it.
Love it. Love it. All right, Dr. Jim, I want to transition here. This is kind of a good segue from isolation to intimacy and sex as we age.
Ah.
Now, yeah, this is how you finish your book, your most recent book. So talk to us again, keeping in mind that the audience listening to this, we're in our 50s and 60s. Hopefully we are intimate and we have a healthy sex practice. But I think it's fair to say that we're probably concerned. What happens when I turn 70 or 80 or 90? What happens to intimacy? What happens to sex? What does that look like? Can you share some of your expertise there and what we might expect and what we can do today to kind of help ensure that this is a part of a facet of our healthy aging practice as we move forward?
Well, I have to say you hit the nail on the head because as we age, now some are going to be very fortunate, but we're not all Picassos that actually, are able to live into our older age fully sexually vibrant. Some of us are going to encounter some form of sexual dysfunction. It's just part of aging when we get into our 70s and 80s. But that's why the intimacy part of it is so important. It's not necessarily the sexual gratification that I think we need to look for as we age. It's the gratification of intimacy, of being together, of holding together, of touching each other. That's so very important as we age because regardless of our sexual prowess or energetic sexual, shall we say, well being, the intimacy factor is probably the most important aspect of all. Now, here again, we get back to those seniors who are lonely, they're by themselves, and how do they experience that? There are ways here again, going to the senior centers and meeting people where you can still, even if you don't perform sexually for whatever reason, you still can have intimate relationships. And that's the most important part. It's not just the gratification, but it's the intimacy that you really want to look for and get in the habit of developing. This is a habit and you need to develop it.
All right. So, yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to dig into that. This is a habit. You need to develop it. And a lot of people are hearing that and probably thinking, yeah, that sounds right. I should do that. Do you have some practical tips? How would somebody like me, I'm married, I've been just 28 years married here. How would I work on deepening and developing intimacy with my wife, or say somebody else listening maybe is, they're divorced in a dating relationship and are kind of scared about the future. How do we develop the habit of intimacy?
So let's talk about American society as a whole. I'm not going to get into Europe where they take mid-afternoon breaks and who knows what they're doing during those mid-afternoons. I happen to have an Italian family, and I guarantee you that sometimes between the hours of 12 to 3, they get in a little playfulness before they go back to work. So Europe's a whole different thing, and other parts of the world who deal with this differently. We're talking about Americans now who are used to a very fast pace of life. Yeah, this has overtaken us. We're used to that, on the go all the time. And the problem is, I hate to say wham bam,
Yeah.
we're done, but that's really part of sometimes sex. We get the sexual gratification and it's over. And so we're on to other things. We've had the gratification. Now we move on. I think in your 50s and 60s, for sure, you need to begin practicing intimacy. And that is, it's not just the sex that you're after, but it's the touching, it's the holding hands at dinner, it's the reaching across and every once in a while when you're walking with your loved one, holding hands. The touching is such an important part of intimacy. We don't realize how important it is. Just little touches on the cheek, on the hair. All of these things are parts of intimacy that we need to develop. And sometimes we overlook because we're so busy in life. We need to take time out, not just to have sex, to become intimate.
I love that. That's very, very well spoken. I don't know if you've seen some of these studies, but they've done primate studies and they're heartbreaking. But they take primates and they keep them completely in isolation, meaning they don't have any touch from other primates. And then, of course, the control group has normal touch of typically a parent and playmates. And it's just tragic what happens. The monkey that doesn't get any touch eventually going to die. Basically, it's going to
Right.
wither away and either experience extremely ill health or even death. That's how critical that the actual physical touches and kind of this intimacy that's different from sexual intimacy, right? So we can kind of almost
And yeah,
pull
right.
those apart, right?
And these animals are sad in the process when you watch them, and
Yes,
you're absolutely right about
clearly, yes,
they're
yes,
not just deteriorating, there's a sadness about them.
yeah,
And
yeah,
with intimacy, there's a happiness no matter how sexually proficient you are, there's still a happiness that you can share together.
yeah, yeah. And I'd go so I'd be so bold as to say it's a joy, right? I mean, happiness can be kind of a joy. To me, joy has more of a spiritual dimension to it, and maybe I'm just making that up. But when the way you're describing that what I feel when I'm intimate with a loved one, look, there's your lover, your spouse, but there's also intimacy with friends. There's intimacy with children. There's intimacy with parents and all of these other people. So yeah, I love that. I think that's a good place for us to kind of finish here on our healthy aging tips for us today. But I want to finish here. Given we started by painting a pretty bleak picture of overall declining, specifically American health, and specifically again to the age demographic I'm currently working with, 50s and 60s. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about our future, mankind's future, when it comes to healthy aging?
Well, in a way, it's not a fair question because I'm an eternal optimist. Now
Okay, fair enough.
that sometimes differs
So
from
there's your bias.
reality.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
good.
it differs from reality. Now, I think it's like anything else. It's like getting into the habit of good eating, getting to the habit of fitness, staying fit, avoiding stress. These are all habits. I think we need to get into the habit of exchanging in a sense, intimacy with one another. I was going to mention that it's not just, like if you're a man that you want to touch a woman, look at how often, and when I see my friends, we hug, whether
Yeah,
they're male or female, we hug.
yeah,
And that's a form of intimacy.
yeah.
And we need to take that hugging a step further. So I think if people realize how, what a horrible situation we've allowed ourselves to drift into, to begin to change things, to begin to look at our neighbors as friends, to begin to seek out friendships with people whom we may politically, economically, sociologically disagree with, I think that's a step. So I'm an eternal optimist. I think we're going to learn a lesson from where we're at, and hopefully we can take it a step further. So am I optimistic? Yes. Am I realistic? Not certain.
That is okay. Yeah, that is very well said. Optimistic, yes. Realistic, maybe. I guess we'll find out here. I'm with you though. My bias is to be naturally optimistic, and I do think that we, the people, we have the power. I don't think that government or technology is going to save us. I don't think that it's going to be policy or whoever candidate makes it into the White House. I don't think that's what's going to save us from a health or any other perspective, really, but specifically from a health perspective. I believe it starts with us. And I do feel like there's some momentum. There's this grassroots of people that are looking at our health, that are questioning the way things have been in the past. And I'm hopeful that this will get some momentum and we'll have people being vibrant and healthy well into their later years, and that making basically whatever decade of life they're in, the best decade of their life, right? I stated on my 60th birthday, this decade will be the best decade of my life. And that's a big goal. So what would I have to do every day to make that a reality? What are the things I need to do today, right?
Right. Well, one of the things I suggest to those who are aging is to stop complaining. Complaining about politics, complaining about things we don't like in life. Let's find things that we do like, things that we do enjoy. You know, when I meet healthy people, I normally meet people that get along with everybody, regardless of political differences. It's those who are not healthy that seem to have the biggest problems. So if you're getting healthy by what you eat, by your fitness, by managing your stress, you're probably going to tend to be more open-minded. And open-minded is the key to really being able to live with each other and stop complaining, look for positives rather than negatives.
Right on. Amen, brother. Yeah, I absolutely love that. All right. Well, Dr. Jim, let's kind of wrap this up here. Where can people learn more about you? Where can they find you? Where do you want to send folks that are interested in learning more about you? And you mentioned earlier that you have a podcast. Where do you want to send people?
Well, it's real simple if they learn how to spell my name, which is not always the simplest way to do it.
Yeah.
But we have a website, which is James Polakof, Polakof.com. We have a myriad of things there, not just podcasts, but, certainly some fairly decent blogs and health information. You want to learn more about movies I've made, you can find it all on the website. But also, I think the one thing I'm happy that I've been able to do is write this particular book, Live Healthy Longer with Dr. Jim. If you go to Amazon and you put in Live Healthy Longer, you may unfortunately find several other books, that lead you to living healthy longer. This is Live Healthy Longer with Dr. Jim. And I think that there's some good advice in there that I hope will be helpful to people. So I recommend that as reading if you can somehow find time for it.
Yeah, I'll second that. There's the book here, folks. It's
there
called
it is.
Live Healthy Longer with Dr. Jim, How to Live a Long Life Filled with Intimacy and Good Health. Who doesn't want that? All right,
Absolutely.
folks, I will drop all of Dr. Jim's information, his social, his website, the link to the book, all of that into the show notes. You guys can find that there. Dr. Jim, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing not just your wisdom and your knowledge with us, but also just your passion and your zest for life and your optimism with us. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day today.
Well, thank you so much. You're a terrific interviewer, and obviously I can see why you have a great following. You deserve it.
Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyle to assist you in your weight loss and fitness journey. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you. I'll put links to everything we talked about in the show notes. You folks can find those over at silveredgefitness.com/309. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to please give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.